Hi, everybody. This is Drew Tomlin with the Association for Middle Level Education, and I'm joined today on this Google Hangout by a wonderful person by Neil Gupta. Neil Gupta is the Director of Secondary Education at Worthington City Schools in Worthington, Ohio. And in addition, he's a blogger, educational thinker, and educational star, and also the author of this article entitled "Using the Teacher-Based Team Process to Raise Teacher Voice." So thanks for the article, and thanks for taking some time to talk about it a little bit more, Neil.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on here to talk about teacher-based teams.
Awesome. So starting right off, what inspired you to write this article, and why are you especially passionate about this topic?
Yeah, so both from the aspect of as I take a look at the research out there and take a look at some of the best practices that happen, I keep coming back and looking at the literature that keeps talking about the need for collaboration to be key. And when we talk about collaboration, I'm a central office administrator, but we know that things have to exist and be real for teachers, and we got to find a way for teachers to collaborate. And that seems to always be a challenge. It's always about time and money, and really for districts to go from good to great or even great to transformational, we realize that we have to provide that opportunity for them to talk to each other. I mean, there are great opportunities and times for districts to go and learn from other districts and get in the car or get on a plane and go. And there's definitely a time and a place for that. But just those daily check-ins or weekly check-ins with their department counterparts or grade level counterparts to share best practices is key. And so as a central office person, administrator, I see that that's something that we have to create those opportunities, that structure for them to collaborate. And then also, not just time, but also a structure which forces them to talk in a structured way, right, so that it's effective, where they're learning from each other, they're looking at some data and making some decisions about that.
Right. So obviously you can't just put people in a room and say, talk amongst yourselves, make great things happen. But as you said, giving them a structure, so it's a purposeful dialogue, which is, it sounds like it was a great learning experience for you. Something that we value quite a lot at AMLE is just honesty and candor about the process, something that you do quite well in the article. So first of all, so thank you for sharing your journey about how you and your team developed the TBT process, especially that first time around. How did those struggles that first time around help you grow personally and professionally as an educational leader, Neil?
So, I think that, like any new thing in and out of education, you tend to kind of like just go by the book. And what you're doing is you're kind of checking the boxes, you're kind of reading it like a manual. And so there's nothing wrong. It doesn't mean that anybody did anything wrong on purpose. But I think that we tended to do things just from a procedural standpoint. And the empathy wasn't there, the ability for us to think deeply about it, to make sure that what we do is purposeful and it makes sense for our culture. So, it's very important that districts can't just go and again, when I talked about the idea about site visits, they can't just say, I like what's going on over there, and I'm going to bring that over to our district and just implement it. It won't feel as part of the culture. You have to kind of make sure it fits. And so kind of the learning process was in the article was that in the district that I was previously in when we first initiated this, and this was initiated really across the state. In your states, in the state of Ohio, we call it teacher-based teams. In other states, they may call it data teams.
Right.
So, we had to really talk about the idea of the transference, about how do you make it part of your existing culture and community. And that just takes practice, that takes time, and really that takes collaboration to be able to be real and push back and say, how do we make sense of it and how do we make it ours?
Excellent. Yeah, and I like how you said the pushing back. And so we have to be brave enough and vulnerable enough to say, this is a nice idea that we've implemented or think about implemented. No, let's push back and see why it's not working or how it can work better and fit into our culture. And of course, whenever you push back against those fence lines or institute a new idea, you're going to get resistance. So how do you work with teachers and or other leaders who are resistant or reluctant to this kind of TBT plan? How do you help, quote unquote, get them on board, if you will, with collaboration and data collection, analysis, and et cetera? I mean, it seems like things that people should naturally do in terms of creating systemic improvement, but sometimes that's not so easy. What do you do?
So I think a couple things. I think it comes down to where we tend to fail in this initiative and as well as others is we don't have clear expectations right off the bat. And so it's important that we sit down and take the time. And again, this goes back to that prior planning of not just kind of throwing things together and then seeing how it goes. Because what we're trying to really do is we're talking about teachers being real with one another and sharing data, sharing best practices, learning and listening to each other. So clear expectations has to be on the floor of and sometimes it may look like a structure of a procedural questions that are going to happen. How do you effectively run the meeting? How do you take notes? Who's going to be the facilitator? Those things have to be stated ahead of time. But really, we got to talk about the idea about building trust. So we're right now reading the book by Lencioni, talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and he talks about the idea of lack of trust is things that prohibit teams from moving forward. And you've got to build that. I had 2 teachers, one a young teacher, again, in that first district, and she was a new teacher right out of college, and she said, look, I will change my practices overnight. I mean, I will do them overnight compared to the teacher that's beside me, but prove it by data first. I'm not going to just change because she's got 20 years on me. I think what I'm doing is pretty good. So, but if data shows that she's getting better results, then I'll definitely start asking questions and I'll want to learn. So 2 things have to happen. You got to bring data, you got to have those structures in place. But then number 2 is you got to be open and willing to be self-reflective and say, I'm willing to change if I do see other people that are doing it better.
Yeah. And oftentimes I've found that schools that are, or teachers who are doing well and have, for instance, high test scores, are sometimes folks who are most resistant to change, in the sense of, hey, I've been doing this for X amount of years and things have been going well, so why should I switch things up? And you mentioned data collection and monitoring processes in particular in your article. What are some of the essential ingredients to making those aspects of the TBT process work? What do you think?
So obviously it comes down to good data comes from a great assessment instrument. And so, I think we all have areas that we need to learn and we need to improve on. If all we're doing is bringing our average scores, our averages together, and I say I've got a 60 and you've got a 50, I'm doing better, 10% better. That doesn't tell the whole story. Or like you'd kind of said about those great teachers. Well, even at 90%, somebody that's receiving maybe a 90% average, when we start to be able to have mechanisms, tools, or resources that help us to analyze the data. And pinpoint, are there certain subgroups that maybe not in that 10%, they're in that 10% mark that's not meeting it? Are there certain concept standards that aren't being met that we can focus in on with that? So within a math test, is there a certain concept that we think that improved? And I think when we get to that level, and again, that's going to take time. It's going to take time to develop good, worthwhile, quality assessments. And then really to grade all that and score that. One of the things that we learned in the first district was when we scheduled the time for teams to meet, they would come together and they were scoring them together. They were scoring them in the room quietly, off in the corner. And it was just not a productive use of time. We said, you've got to analyze, or you've got to score them outside of the time, and then when we come together, use that time to talk and share. So they needed those questions to be able to say, what are the strengths in the concepts, what subgroups do we need to improve on, and what are we going to do differently next week? Not next year, next week.
Right, exactly, because kids can't wait a whole nother year for us to figure it out. They need action and those instructional differences being made now. Very good, very good. All right, so Neil, obviously you've answered those questions with flying colors, so I think you're ready for an even more advanced inquiry, if you're ready for a metaphorical question.
Let's go for it.
Go for it. Okay, and this is one of my favorite ones, so get ready. If teams were a food for middle level education, what kind of food would they be and why, Neil?
Wow, I think it's the steak. And I like a nice steak. I like it medium. I like a little butter on top. And what I think it is, I think it's the main course. I think it's that thing that you want to put on the plate, and it's right in that front and center. I think that as districts have to focus in on areas that they need to improve, and I talk about that. I'm very passionate about that. There's no silver bullets. I constantly talk about that. I don't consider the TBT process a silver bullet, but I talk about it as being, it's got to be that hallmark. It's got to be something that you give worthwhile attention to. So it can't be on that laundry list of things that you're going to do, and it just happens to be on the list at number 7. If you're going to go the route of teacher-based teams, it's like ordering that steak. You don't want to fill up on the salad. You don't want to fill up on the other stuff. You know that steak's coming, and you want to give it its attention. So, I think that's where districts will fail, is they will say, hey, that TBT thing sounds good. Let's have an in-service about it. Let's implement it tomorrow, and then let's move on to the next initiative. As they got it. And really, it is a year-long process. As I talked about before, we're changing culture and beliefs for teachers and administrators, and we have to give them that time and that patience and that scaffolding, just like we would with our students. And we have to give it the attention that it deserves.
Right. So the TBT process and teams are not the side salad. They're not the baked potato. They are the main course. And so I
want a nice steak. You don't give me chicken. I want steak.
That's right. That's right. And so I mean, and to go with that too, as you've already mentioned how you like your steak, that there are, as part of the teaming process, making it not personalized, but I mean, people like their steaks in different ways. Some people like them well done. Some people like them medium, like you said, with a little bit of soup on top. So is that part of the teaming process too? How do you personalize it?
Yeah. So great point. So, and again, this was the failure in the first, learned it in the second, was that a lot of research talks about tight and loose coupling. So this idea about tight being, we're very too structured and rigid. And again, we were just learning the process. We were reading a book, or we went to a presentation or something, and we came back and said, all teacher-based teams have to do it this way. And we pushed it out there. And what we realized was, and here's the structure. Well, in our minds, it made sense for, I'm just making it up, high school mathematics. But it didn't make sense for that same structure to work for elementary art, for example.
Right.
And so, it created that dissonance. It created that frustration. It created that, compliance over commitment piece that set in. In our learning that happened over time, we started to realize there's got to be tight, loose coupling, which means there's got to be tight things in place that say teacher-based teams have to meet regularly. And we didn't define regularly. We said they got to meet regularly, but your teacher-based team can decide when that regularly is. It could be weekly, could be twice a week, or twice a month, whatever. We talked about, so there's that tight, loose. We talked about, the form isn't what matters. It's the questions that drive it. So what are those well thought out questions that need to be there? And can they be adapted? Sure, they can be adapted. Sure, they can, they need to be there. As long as they meet these high threshold requirements, feel free to do that. So you got to give the ability for people to decide, to your point, and to keep that steak analogy, for people to feel free about that. But without discounting the need for those basic structural, foundational, research-based practices that you got to say are non-negotiables.
Right.
But all the other stuff, the how it happens, if you want to, if one person wants to take notes through Google Docs and another group wants to take notes pencil and paper, as long as that works for them, that's fine.
Right. Exactly.
But the ability to take notes is important. So
exactly. Yeah. So the steak is essential as the main course, and then like tools with which you deal with that steak need to have some consistency too, in some ways, that everyone's using a fork and a knife and a plate. What tools do we give people so they can feel like they can participate on a team,
right,
and digest all of this? There you go. All right.
I love it. I'm getting hungry.
Cool. All right. Well, Neil, gosh, thank you so much for for more of the conversation on teacher-based teams, a journey that we really enjoyed hearing about, and hopefully all the educational leaders, teachers, and administrators out there that checked it out too, hopefully you'll find some really great stuff. So thanks for taking the time, Neil.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. And thank you, AMLE Magazine readers, for checking out the article and this interview here at AMLE. Really help you reach every student, grow professionally, and create great schools. Thanks again, Neil.
Thank you.